Hello and welcome to episode 13 of this Inspire 2020 Visionary Leader Chat Series. I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Caselden. I know Jeff very well. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Simon. Great to see you.
It's great to see you. And we've worked together. I've known you for 3 years now. And so Jeff is former general manager for Amazon Ireland. You are co-founder and principal of Caselden Consulting. You're a mentor to Enterprise Ireland. You advise a number of companies and leaders in the whole area of realizing potential, unlocking growth. And I also think you're a great guy for sharing and helping others. So it's wonderful to have you here. And
great to be here. Happy to help out again.
It's great to see you. So maybe just jump in. So maybe, 5 minutes, just a little bit of background on you and how you got to where you are today and how you got to doing all those wonderful things.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm originally from the United States. You could probably tell listening to me, even though I live in Dublin these days. Grew up in Indiana as a kid. That was life until I was 25. Hadn't really seen a whole lot outside of that area. I got married to my partner, who's actually my business partner today. We've been together for over 25 years, Mindy.
Shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we left Indiana pretty quickly after we got married. We moved to Seattle. And about 6 months after moving there, I joined a little company called Amazon.com that this was in like early 1999, where people were occasionally inclined to buy things like a book or a CD or a VHS cassette online.
Yeah, I hear Jeff Bezos is projected to be the first trillionaire, but that's another thing.
Yeah, we'll see. But I ended up kind of stumbling into that company, not really knowing what the hell I was getting myself into. Moved after about 6 years down to San Francisco. Stayed in San Francisco for 4 years, worked in Silicon Valley, still with Amazon at that point in time. Then moved to Dublin, Ireland back in 2008, just a few weeks before the financial crisis. And so I've been here almost 12 years now, I'm dual citizen. Dublin and Ireland very much feels like home. So co-founder, as you mentioned before, of Caselden Consulting. Most of the work that we do is really on the people side of things. And I think, we just approach it with this kind of keen eye towards like bringing humanity back into the equation. It's something I think that in a lot of organizations maybe is a secondary or absent thought. But prior to that, yes, as you mentioned, been with Amazon for about 17 years. I kind of started in customer service, learned engineering on the job, ended up moving into working in infrastructure at Amazon for a number of years. And then when we moved to California, it was actually, I started to work on the search engine for Amazon, on the operational side of things. Great experience, just huge learning for almost that entire 17 plus years. Just surrounded by some of the best, some of the brightest mentors that I could possibly hope to have in a super dynamic, really fast-paced, changing, innovative company that had a really unique kind of culture. And it was in many ways it was kind of the means to getting us to where we're at today. I think I think certainly taking on the leadership role that I took on near the end of my career at Amazon to lead the development center in Dublin, which at the time was 250, 300 people back in 2013, and grew that over the course of about 3.5 years to about 1,500 people. It's still today like one of the biggest technology sites in EMEA for Amazon.
Maybe just ask a question at this point. So yesterday I was fortunate to interview Molly Chang, a really inspiring coach based in New York and I think Denver, and she's ex-Cisco, and she's now come up with this process, and she calls it the Say It Skillfully process, right? So she does very similar work to you over in the States about helping leaders develop more of a collaborative chemistry and business owners to make the organization more human. And what inspired her, right? And I'm wondering if the same happened to you, was her observations in the big corporates. And I'm not just calling out Cisco here, but a number of corporates she did mergers and acquisitions with, which was a lack of honest communication, a disconnect between humans and silos and all that stuff that we all see and feel as, you know, I've worked for big multinationals, but nobody really speaks out. Did you notice that and feel that in your gut? And if you did, has that kind of helped frame your more human approach now?
It's definitely helped to frame the more human approach, because while there were a number of things I learned at Amazon, some of which I've carried forth with me today and very much underpin how I think about certain kinds of things. There were a couple of areas where there were just clear deficits or misalignments, and I ended up taking off. I was fortunate enough to have a sabbatical for about 3 months. Just about 9 months before I finally left the company. And it was during that point in time that I really just sat down and reflected on this and really thought a lot about, okay, well, what is it that I've taken from this experience? Because I mean, that was the whole purpose of trying to lead the site. For me, it wasn't about, position or authority. It was about, I'd been part of growing something that was really on the cusp of being something just truly amazing or just falling apart. And I chose to try to do what I could to make the first half of that work. But I had to do that through influence. I didn't lack the kind of authority just from organizational structure. So it very much made me think about, how do you get other people to collaborate? How do you build a strong vision that you get people on board and behind, and really get people pushing in the same direction? So some of the other aspects of Amazon's culture I wouldn't have been as thrilled with. I mean, it's what people often make it out to be in the media.
It's a big machine. I mean, I've worked for Dell and Xilinx. I mean, these are big machines, and at the end of the day, the C-suite is there, whether we like it or not, to make sure that the shareholders are happy, which makes it a money-making machine. That's the reality. But I think some C-suites and managers and some of the more forget that without humans, there is no money. So you still have to balance it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the, that's one of the things that it's funny, because like I say, that's one of the things that Amazon's quite good at, is like the systems kind of thinking of understanding how all of these different things are interconnected. But yeah, that was just an area for me where I sort of felt, you kind of forget that you're operating in a closed system. You don't have an infinite, I mean, maybe in a sense you could theoretically say you have an infinite pool of people that you can continue to draw from. But there's a cost associated with that. There's a cost associated with developing talent internally as well. I don't know. I just, near the end, I really sort of, it just really stuck with me that, like, without the people that you have in your team, you can't do anything. You don't have a company. You don't have you've nothing, So I think, we have to, my view at least is that we have to take stock of that. And if we don't, we're actually taking actions that will undermine the long-term longevity and success of the organization.
Don't you think it's amazing that some organizations have endured so long without really, by paying lip service to this? It's quite amazing that some companies have just not really delved into the humanity within the organization and still survived. But it's not the model to follow. So just in terms of the work you do today, okay, so I know I know the sort of companies, organizations you work for, and the sort of leaders, and you're about, unlocking potential and help people to realize their potential and maximize growth without, telling everybody how, the full details of how Caselden Consulting does this. What sort of approach would you say if a business comes to you and says, we think, if we improve some of our internal human processes, we could accelerate? How do you start and develop that process with them?
Well, I think one of the first things you have to do is really try to understand what's the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and is that outcome one that you personally believe that you want to support? That is a reality, I think, of the nature of being in business on your own, is that you can pick and choose what kind of challenges you want to get involved with, what types of things you want to help drive forward. So so that always, you know, it always starts there, just trying to understand the outcome. Assuming that we're aligned with it, then it's, you know, trying to understand the reality of where people are at now,
Yeah.
the options that they see before them, sometimes helping them to stretch their own thinking, to consider other options that maybe they don't think of. You know, I think a lot of our work and a lot of the value we probably bring to most of our clients is just, it's asking questions, you know, it's getting people to consider things that they haven't thought of before, that could actually have an impact. And, you know, from there, it's starting to see, you know, the connection between all of these things. What are the different places where there's a lever that we can pull that, you know, really puts this into motion, or attaches it to some activity of meaning within the business. It's essentially embedding culture within how you operate, and making sure that, you know, the values that you're talking about, the things that you're espousing as a leadership team that you want to be or become, that you're doing those things, that you're living them, and being able to create enough of a dialogue within the organization to understand maybe what you're missing from the balcony that you sit on, as opposed to, you know, somebody who's down in the, you know, the front row in the trenches. And to be able to leverage other people's like passion and ideas as well. You know, you know, leaders don't have all the answers, generally.
No,
absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, the whole area of vulnerability is really interesting. I've spoken to, you know, some amazing leaders during this series, and one of them was Eduardo Brasenio, who's co-founder of Growth Mindset in California, and Carol Dweck, the co-founder, wrote The Million Seller Mindset. And I was blown away. You know, this is a powerful man running an amazing company, education company in the States. And at the end of the interview, and he won't mind me saying this, he said to me, "How did I come across?" And initially I thought, why is the expert in mindset telling me? But then it made sense, because if you have a growth mindset, you're always looking for improvement, you know? So, you know, he was practicing what he preaches, you know. If you have a fixed mindset, you want to be told you're the best, because that's what you're aspiring to, and you're not really that open to going any further, right? So if you have a fixed mindset, and then next day you're told you're not the best, you're in trouble. So do you find this with, do you find there are any differences in companies or in geographical approaches? Do you think Irish companies are more growth mindset orientated, or more fixed mindset, or what patterns do you see when you work with clients?
You kind of asked me a few questions there. I see, you know, I definitely see some differences between, you know, a lot of organizations that I work with. I see, you know, one of the things that's kind of, that I think is kind of, that's been sort of interesting for me in my own personal experiences, having left Amazon, I've worked with a couple of fairly successful European startups who have either been very strongly inspired by Amazon in terms of how they've structured themselves and in terms of how they operate, in terms of even how they approach culture, or they have a fairly large contingency of former Amazonians that actually work there, like some of my former colleagues, you know. And one of the things that's been interesting, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily answering the question that you asked me, but I remember one of the things that one of the revelations I've really had in the last couple of months is like one of these companies that I work in, that I do some work with, is called Klarna. They're a bank and a payments provider based in Sweden. Huge influence from Amazon. Very different in terms of how they operate. They're at Amazon, you know, we would have come up with a long kind of plan for what we were going to do for the long term. We'd had a really good sense of what the measures of success were going to be, how we were going to approach things, really well kind of thought out. Klarna does a little bit of that, but they have a little bit more of a tendency towards like, let's just go do something and see what happens, and then kind of learn from it, and then iterate and do something different. And like we did that at Amazon, but in a slightly different way. But one of the ways I see it manifest itself oddly for me is like when I'm writing documents that I know are going to go before a fairly large audience of very influential people. When I would do that at Amazon, I would spend an inordinate amount of time on it, because if you got to the end and it didn't really come out well, you got a bit of a lashing out of it, you know, and it wasn't always productive.
Yeah.
There were definitely things you would learn
Yeah.
that, you know, you'd be asked to go back and redo.
Yeah.
I think culturally, though, in this organization, there's a little bit more of a mindset of like, well, we kind of don't expect that you're going to get it perfect this first go around. So
Yeah.
it's normal that you know, you miss some things. So like, that's
Yeah.
okay. Like, just go back and do it.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, for me, it's been like a mental shift I've had to make in terms of
Yeah.
like what my normal operating kind of system is to like
Yeah.
retrain myself.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun as well, because you get to see some of the good things that you can take out of all these different types of organizations in terms of how they operate,
Yeah.
and not only like embody them myself, but like share some of that thinking with my clients as well,
Yeah.
and help them maybe challenge like just the way that they go about doing things to get to a place that's
Yeah.
more constructive and less destructive. Because you know,
That's really interesting, because you know, like you, I started working for the big 5 law firms in the UK, then Ireland, then a couple of big American multinationals, then another big American multinational in Australia. So I come from that very regimented, linear thinking, process driven. If it's not in the information bible within the company, then you're going off parameter.
Mhm.
Then I jumped off my cliff 7 years ago in Australia and started my own business and invested in a couple of small businesses. And that was the complete opposite. It was seat of the pants, starting businesses without even a business plan, and then seeing how well you do before the money runs out. And
Mhm.
but it's interesting that I wonder, is there a way of combining the two? How many big companies bring back that nimble, small thinking internally? You know, I mean, Apple, to an extent, did that in 99 when they were struggling, and they gave a group of engineers 6 months and they eventually came up with the iPod. But how many big companies really are prepared to give breathing space for innovation and mistakes? Do you see that, or do you never see it, or sometimes see it, or do you get frustrated because you don't see it? All of
Probably
those.
all the above, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, I mean, I think that you know, companies that I think continue to rely on a more hierarchical model of, you know, command and control, as opposed to you know, a more of a distributed system where people are granted autonomy and ownership over their problem space to, you know, to really understand it, to own it, and do everything they can. And
yeah,
I think I see those companies do better on one hand because they're more
yeah,
nimble, they're more agile. The
yeah,
thing that often I think maybe you find in those organizations that perhaps is less favorable is that there's a when you kind of operate in almost that siloed sort of sense, there's a lot of reinvention that can kind of happen.
there is.
There,
There's a lot of
there can't,
overlap, duplication, isn't there, and
yeah, yeah,
miscommunication.
yeah. We'd had that at Amazon quite a bit until AWS became a much more
Yeah,
robust set of services. You know, every team was kind of solving problems their own certain way until eventually it was like, use this common set of things. And that,
yeah,
and I think, and interestingly enough, that was a huge accelerator, I think, for Amazon in many ways. And I see that in some of the other companies I work with, where they've gotten from that point of, we're growing, we're all figuring out how we do things on our own, and you get to a point where, okay, there's some economy of scale that can be realized here if we make some investments in the right places that will solve, you know, 70-80% of the challenges that most of the teams have. And
yeah,
then the ones that really need to do something unique, they can go off and do that. But you know, there's also a challenge, I think, on the communication side of things. If you're that siloed, how do you make sure that all the people are kind of reading off the right hymn sheet at the same
yeah,
time? And that can be a real challenge to solve.
yeah,
You know,
and
I'm not
yeah.
sure the best approach is a super heavy-handed
No, it's a
you know,
balance.
process division or
Yeah,
whatever. But yeah,
yeah. That's the interesting about
I think
companies. Yeah, companies are
well,
living
it's
organisms.
and they're very much reflective of the people that
Yeah,
exist within them. So, you
absolutely.
know, that's, I mean, you know, I think that's one of the things that's made Amazon quite so successful, is that it's kind of that mindset that Bezos has. You know, he's seeing opportunity everywhere. He's thinking of how can we become, as a company, a utility in
Yeah,
every person, in every aspect of a person's life.
yeah,
And he's structured things in terms of how much control he has over the company as well, to make
yeah,
sure that you know, he's playing a completely different game than everybody else.
Mm.
They're making bets on a 5 to 10 year kind of timeline, where most companies are operating month to month, quarter to quarter.
Yeah.
And I think that you know, that not only leads to different thinking, but I think if you think about what's happening in the world right now, it's the kind of thing that can help to insulate you against some of the shocks of something like COVID-19. You know, if you're not thinking a little bit further ahead, like,
yeah. I was going to say that. So I was lucky to write. I wrote an article for Irish Tech News a couple of weeks ago on, and I did a lot of research for it, which was on, can you really say that human collaboration, humans collaborate in a social context, will necessarily coalesce with collaborative technology? Can you really say that it's inevitable, or will there always be a slight trade-off? And there is no answer, right? Nobody really knows. But this whole crisis, I'll use the word crisis, has really focused people's minds, for better or worse. And there's a huge amount of debate. We're probably almost over the debate as to whether we're ever going to go back to the way we were, as to whether technology has taken over. And there's, yes, pros and cons for both of these. But what do you see in terms of the clients you work with, or potential clients, in terms of how they can use this change period to pivot for the better going forward? I mean, what would you advise them to do going forward?
Yeah, like it's a great question. That's a big one.
It's a big question.
You know, I mean, it's an unprecedented time that we're dealing with.
I know.
In terms of, you know, you mentioned the United States when we first got on the call before we started recording. Obviously, there's a lot of chaos happening in the country right now. The inequities, the short-sightedness, not only within businesses, but within governments as well.
Yeah.
That over-indexed kind of focus that we have sometimes on profit and growth.
Yeah.
Like, all of this stuff has like been laid bare as a result of this pandemic. And these are all like stark realities I think we can't really ignore.
Exactly.
And I think for those, you know, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and that I certainly see a lot of our clients talking about, is like these systems of like control, these traditional methods of, or approaches to work, like maybe these just don't really make sense anymore. You know, like large offices, a shitty commute, prescriptive working hours. Like I think we're all starting to realize now, these are choices that we have made. These are things that we have decided to align ourselves with or conform to, and they're not really they're not the reality of how things must be. And I think that, you know, I think a lot of people maybe are even questioning some of the fundamental like economic belief system that we live within. You know, like in many ways, and this sounds a little funny since I know we both kind of do work talking about things related to growth. But there is a fallacy of infinite growth that most of us believe into. There's a woman by the name of Kate Raworth who I would highly recommend anyone to check out. Concept called donut economics. You know, it's this notion that we live within a closed system, both within, in terms of this planet and what this planet can sustain and can take, and what we as people in a society can as well. And we also live under the other fallacies of like truly free markets and things like this. I mean, let's face it, like corporate socialism is really what exists in many countries. And I think if we're really thinking about transformation, about what a better future could be, like, I think we have to remember that notion of being in a closed system, and we have to be able to balance what we do with the rest of that system. Like, what you're doing really is it truly sustainable all the way up and down the chain, you know? Not just in terms of what happens in your office, but your suppliers and further downstream of that, and so on and so forth. And you know, I think a lot of people really, you know, thinking on a longer timeline, a very good exercise and kind of planning for the future that a lot of people probably don't do. We're as humans, we're kind of hardwired for survival in many ways, and like reflection is not something that a lot of us make time and space for. But that is, I think, one of the most important things that
I agree,
especially that we have to be able to make space for that in our lives. Otherwise, how do you expect to change? How are you going to do anything differently?
I was going to say that for me, that's the key point. So, we both do work around growth, and I've reflected hugely particularly these last 12 weeks. And, I do work around business growth, leadership growth, a bit of brand growth. But the fourth area for me was personal or mindset growth. And that was the area that I kind of had left behind until recently. But it's dawning on me more and more that, you're right. There is there's not an infinite external growth system. Like, we're all constrained by the ozone layer and planet Earth and the resources. But I think one area of growth we've kind of neglected as humankind is the inner growth. That's almost boundless. That's almost endless. And I think this time of reflection was very, very untapped, very untapped. And I think this time of reflection, for me personally, I've really use this to reflect on who I am, what I want to do, what I don't want to do. And I think, being an optimist, I think a lot of optimists and pragmatists and positive people, I can see that they're reflecting a lot more. And I think those people with the more fixed mindset, we won't mention political leaders, don't really have that capacity. I think they just don't have the capacity to reflect internally. I think they're just constantly thinking external growth. So I think that as a subject is very interesting, don't you think? The internal growth is boundless almost.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're very right. I mean, I think that, and I certainly don't want to offend or label anyone, but I think that some of those leaders are stuck at a stage of human development that is just significantly, kind of further down the path than,
I agree.
People who have, especially our leaders that we have who recognize this notion that, there's something that we can all get out of this. It's not just something for the top 1% to be rewarded from. I mean, that's, I think that's part of what's gotten us to where we're at today. And I think if I'm, if I put my optimist hat on for a while, despite the fact that, watching what I've seen in the United States in the last week, which, I mean, really breaks my heart. I mean, these are people who, deserve the same basic fundamental human rights as everybody else. And this is, why is this a hard conversation to have?
I know.
But sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going there. But yeah, I'm optimistic. Sorry, I remember now. I'm optimistic because I think one thing that's different maybe about the situation that we have right now compared to, say, five years ago or so, when Black Lives Matter was really kind of emerged into the social discourse in the United States, and people like Colin Kaepernick were, taking a lot of flack for kneeling during the national anthem, trying to make a very peaceful, calm statement on what is a narrative that we're continuing to see the ramifications of today. Like, the thing that's different now is that I think this whole pandemic situation, I think, has maybe laid things a little barer than they may have been before. If you think back to that situation 5-6 years ago, economic prosperity for many people still probably going pretty well. Pretty hard to say anybody's really doing all that great right now, aside from maybe a feit people really at the very, very top who are finding ways still to capitalize on catastrophe. But
I think
it makes it harder, I think, to come back from some of these kinds of things, and it's the same in the workplace. It's like, one of our clients says they've in the past had an absolute policy against working from home. Their company would not exist now if they couldn't work from home. And the logic and the reasoning that may have supported that argument back then doesn't really support it now. These are kind of these one-way sort of doors that we can't come back through.
I agree. I call it a circuit breaker. And people have been sitting in traffic 2 hours each way, or even, God forbid, 3 hours each way, 5 days a week. I think a lot of these people, and I've been there, right, should be, and I hope do, increasingly say, why should I go back to that? Like, why? What's the point? What's the point? So I think you're right. And just wrapping up, I think a lot has been stripped bare by the confluence of what's happened at this time. I also think conversely, thank God this has happened now, right? Particularly the pandemic, during a period where we have technologies like this. Imagine if this had happened 15 years ago. Imagine, so I'd like to finish, I'd like to finish optimistically because, humankind does have an amazing way to wriggle through disasters and periods like this. And I think we will, right? We will. Okay. So if you were going to, just to conclude, if you were going to whisper 2 or 3 words of wisdom or advice, or just something calming to an aspiring leader of, say, a medium-sized Irish business looking to survive and then thrive after this, what 2 or 3 things would you say to them?
Going through what we're going through right now, I think that empathy and compassion are just 2 non-negotiables that you just have to bring to the table.
Yeah.
And there are probably moments right now where you have to be able to listen more than even talk. I think people are having to adapt to something they haven't really had to deal with before. Maybe they've had a taste of it.
Yeah.
Mindy and I have been lucky enough to work remotely quite a bit for over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
So it's not completely foreign to us like it might be for some people.
Yeah.
But it's hard, if you're an extrovert who gets a lot of your energy from being around people and saying 25,000 words a day, and now you're stuck in a 400 square foot or 40 square meter apartment, and you have no contact with people other than through the screen. It can be crushing in many ways.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be empathetic. You have to bring compassion. And I think, I guess the other thing that maybe I would just say is, I thought about this before, and you kind of asked me a slightly different question, but I'm going to say it anyways because I do think it's a positive thing to end on. And it also, I think, maybe touches on, we said we wouldn't talk too much about politics, but it maybe gives a little bit of lip service to it without totally going down that path, which is that great leaders unite rather than divide.
Yeah.
And they also contextualize change that might stand to divide us otherwise. And find some better role models than what you're seeing on television right now.
No, absolutely.
And focus on those things that really bring us all together, because I think to be successful through this situation, or even just in the old normal of what business was like, the more that you have people operating from a place of mutual understanding, meeting each other's needs, and all pushing in the right direction for that shared objective that you have, the easier everything is going to be for you.
That's perfect. That's perfect. No, I think I'll finish there. Great leaders unite, I think, is a really way of thinking about it. And Jeff, I really enjoyed that. I think this is the longest chat I've had, so I could have spoken for a long time. So I really enjoyed it, and thanks for your time and
my pleasure,
and your wisdom as well. Thanks very much.
Happy to do it, Simon. Always good to see you. So
and you. Okay.
Best of luck.
See you. Thanks.
Check
Bye.
you soon.
Bye.